move on up and have three distinguished men talk about their lives. So we begin with David Johns, and we're very pleased that the Executive Director for African Americans, for Excellence for African Americans, has joined us from the White House. He has worked for Obama for America, but perhaps even more relevantly, he was a senior education advisor for the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Very pleased to begin with David Johns and to thank him for coming to testify before us today.
Madam Co-Chair, if it's okay, I want to yield a few minutes of my time to Mr. Crump to ask a couple of questions.
Excuse me?
If it's okay with you, I'd like to yield a couple of minutes of my time. He has two quick questions he'd like to ask that will frame our discussion.
By all means, Mr. Crump.
Thank you, Congresswoman. As Mr. Martin said, President Obama comments invited us to start the conversation, and I think the conversation starts with two critical questions. And the first question is to the Department of Justice to answer the question, can a private citizen with a 9mm gun profile our children, get out of his car and follow our children, and confront our children? The U.S. Supreme Court doesn't even let the police profile based on race alone. So we need to have that question answered so we'll know what to tell our children. And if that answer is yes, we need to know so we can tell our children. And if it's no, then we want to know, especially Ms. Sabrina Fulton and Mr. Trayvon Martin, will the killer of their child be held accountable for the civil rights violations upon Tracy and Sabrina's son? And then secondly and finally, the foundation is working to ask the question of the Trayvon Martin Act, and that is a very common sense legislation. We believe there should be an amendment to this stand your ground law that simply says you cannot be the initial aggressor, you cannot start the confrontation, you cannot pick the fight and then shoot the person and put your hands in the air and say, I was standing my ground, because there's a precedent set that will have a terrible effect on little black and brown boys if we don't speak to the issue. So I ask those questions, and I know we have these able experts to help us, but these are two questions that are heavy on the hearts of the parents of Trayvon Martin. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Some of us believe that stand your ground laws are such a clear and present danger to African American boys and men that the only remedy should be to roll back these laws, beginning with the state of Florida. I understand the difficulties in Florida, but you ask profound questions, some of them with legal underpinning. I'm going to ask Mr. Johns if he would testify this time.
Yes, ma'am. I want to begin by thanking you, Congresswoman Holmes Norton, and you, Congressman Danny Davis, for your leadership and vision in establishing the Congressional Caucus on Black Men and Boys, and for convening this groundbreaking hearing. The members of the Congressional Black Caucus continue to ensure that we have the tough conversations and engage in the hard work required to become a more perfect union. And as a result of your collective leadership and dedication, we are a better nation. I am humbled and honored to be included on a panel that includes Mr. Martin, Mr. Michael Eric Dyson, and Mr. Kwesi Mfume. I stand on the shoulders of strong, committed visionaries and ancestors who toiled and struggled, who pioneered and who died to enable us to gather here today. And we meet to discuss developing and enhancing programs, policies, and practices that, among other things, increase black male success in education, entrepreneurship, and employment, facilitate civic engagement and leadership development opportunities, and change private thoughts and often negative public conversations about black boys and men into words and deeds that support success. As a former Congressional Black Caucus fellow who had the privilege of beginning my Capitol Hill career working for Congressman Charles B. Rangel, thank you, and now serving as the Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans, I have the responsibility and opportunity to ensure that the administration is a thoughtful partner in supporting African American learning and development. The work of the initiative has never been more important as we consider opportunities like this one to ensure that we no longer avoid tough conversations about investing in our children and protecting them, particularly our most vulnerable, often the most neglected. And while my remarks here today will focus on early education, the initiative's mandate to close the achievement gap for all African American children requires full attention to the education continuum, beginning in the earliest years through adulthood. Neither zip code nor skin tone should predetermine the quality of a child's opportunities. However, studies show what conventional wisdom suggests, that children from low-income families, and black boys in particular, are least likely to have access to high-quality early education. They are least likely to enter elementary school prepared for success. Consider that by third grade, children from low-income families who are not reading at grade level are 6 times less likely to graduate from high school than those who are proficient in reading. High-quality early education provides the foundation for black boys to be successful in school and in life, to become strong black men. I want to underscore the point that learning begins at birth, and the preparation for learning starts well before birth. We cannot solve the employment or education crises facing black boys and men and America without first ensuring that they all have access to high-quality early education. Not only must we work towards providing all young black males with access to high-quality early education, we must make concerted efforts to provide support for them inside and outside the classroom too, extending through college completion and career entry. In the United States, those most likely to begin kindergarten at an academic disadvantage are low-income and minority children. And research also tells us that those who begin school behind have a tendency to remain behind throughout their careers. We must understand the importance of educating and developing young black boys before problems arise. And there is a tremendous amount of work that must be done as early as birth to ensure that they develop academically, socially, and emotionally, which includes developing positive, nurturing, and protective relationships with parents and adults, including educators, representatives of the criminal justice and legal systems, male mentors, and peers. Allow me to share a few facts to help put my comments into context. The infant mortality rate for black babies is 13.2% compared to 5.3% for whites. That is more than double. The poverty rate for black children is 36%, 3 times the rate for white children. At 24 months of age, black babies score significantly lower than white babies on cognitive assessments. And at about age 4, 28% of black children were proficient at letter recognition, compared to nearly 40% of white kids. 55% of black children were proficient at number and shape recognition, compared to more than 70% of white children. From the time of conception to the first day of kindergarten, development proceeds at a pace exceeding that of any other subsequent period of life. And as Harvard professor Jack Shonkoff reminds us, nurturing and responsive interactions build healthy brain architecture that provides a solid foundation for later learning, behavior, and health. Simply stated, access to high-quality early education for African American boys especially can be the difference between a pathway that leads to the White House and one that leads to the jailhouse. High-quality early education can be used to overcome cognitive and non-cognitive challenges facing black boys, including the absence of a father, exposure to violence, and disproportionate representation in detention and special education programs. African American children who participate in early Head Start have higher receptive vocabularies, display less aggressive behavior, report lower levels of bullying, and score higher on math and reading assessments in elementary school than African American children that who not participate in these programs. Gains persist through adulthood as children who attend high-quality preschool programs are more likely to graduate from high school prepared to take full advantage of the global 21st century marketplace after successfully completing college. Parents, families, and communities also benefit from high-quality early education. African American parents with children who participate in high-quality programs have better language and literacy environments, emotionally supportive parenting, and show higher levels of support for education in the home. The first step to ensuring that black boys grow into strong men is giving them access to high-quality early education. And to accomplish this, the initiative is working with members of the faith-based and early education advocacy communities to raise awareness among parents and families about the importance of investing during these most critical years. We are working with community-based organizations to ensure that parents and families can identify and have access to high-quality programs. We are undertaking efforts to afford African American children exposure to science, technology, engineering, the arts, technology, engineering, the arts and agriculture, and mathematics, our STEAM programs and concepts early and often. And we are also working with publishers to produce books and content that reflects the language, culture, and heritage of black kids to ensure that they develop vocabulary and pre-literacy skills needed to make the critical transition from learning to read to reading to learn. And in what follows, I will outline a few critical opportunities that we have to invest in early opportunities for black men. The first is home visiting. Voluntary home visiting programs outline a few critical opportunities that we have to invest in early opportunities for black men. The first is home visiting. Voluntary home visiting programs match parents with trained professionals to provide information and support during pregnancy and throughout a child's first years of life. Quality home visiting programs lead to fewer children in social welfare and juvenile detention centers as well as mental health facilities. It also provides considerable cost savings for states. With the support of Congress, we have invested $1.5 billion to expand home visitation programs that can provide black boys with the services and educational support needed to improve health, development, and ensure their ability to learn, and we must simply invest more. Home visiting programs provide critical support to young expecting mothers like my sister, who after becoming pregnant in high school needed the counsel and support of trained professionals who could assist her and my mother in creating the type of environment that optimizes early life opportunities for young children like my niece Jordan. By supporting African American mothers, fathers, and communities and understanding how important it is that we invest in young children beginning at birth, and by equipping black families with the information and resources needed to access high-quality early education, we can make sure that the earliest steps black boys take prepare them for a life of success. Two is child care. In the United States, more than 11 million children under the age of 5 are in some type of child care arrangement each week. On average, children of working mothers spend 35 hours a week in child care, many with multiple providers to allow parents opportunities to work during both non-traditional and traditional work hours. Child care is an essential work support, which also provides opportunities to develop foundational skills in young children. However, for too many African American boys, the extreme cost associated with high-quality child care results in lost opportunities to develop the tools needed to begin school ready to learn. By age 5, 56% of low-income black kids are not prepared for kindergarten. And these gaps only widen when black boys miss out on early opportunities. Unlike the K-12 public education system, which is financed mostly by federal, state, and local governments, the cost for child care is largely borne by parents and families. The economic crisis, high cost of child care, and variance in state laws frequently lead many parents to pursue non-center-based methods of informal care, such as leaving their babies with grandparents, families, and other caring adults. And for those who pursue center-based facilities, the cost can be an extreme burden. The average cost of infant child care at licensed center exceeds the cost of public college tuition and related fees in 36 states throughout this country. Nationally, the cost for full-time child care for infants ranges from 7 to 16% of the median income for a married couple. For single parents, the cost of center-based infant care exceeds more than 10% of their income. More must be done to subsidize the cost of high-quality child care for parents who cannot afford such programs because they are unemployed or underemployed, working jobs that do not provide them with family-sustaining wages or opportunities for advancement. In addition to cost and accessibility, the following must be addressed to ensure that more black boys have access to high-quality child care programs and services. Improving safety, increasing awareness, and parent, family, and community engagement to ensure that parents, especially young parents, have the information they need to access these programs. And adjusting federal reimbursement rates to account for the actual cost of providing care, while increasing federal, state, and local supports more generally. The third is Head Start and Early Head Start. Head Start and Early Head Start circumvent the high cost of quality early education by providing federal supports and programs that agree to serve low-income, disadvantaged children and their families. The program covers costs for families that meet certain income eligibility criteria, particularly families that would otherwise fail to enroll children in center-based programs. A recent study of Head Start found that the program had a positive, statistically significant impact on children's preschool experiences, school readiness, language, and vocabulary skills. Black children were reported to have reduced inattentiveness, fewer problems with structured learning, peer interactions, or teacher interactions. They also had better relationships with teachers. And while the long-term effects of Head Start deserve additional research, the program's ability to close gaps and prepare low-income minority children for kindergarten is difficult to deny. For decades now, Head Start has improved life opportunities for black boys. And while we celebrate